Hey everyone, welcome to another installment of this crazy year of COVID and hybrid and all this stuff. This is, I'll be upfront with you guys. This is a lecture that I really wish we could be in person, one-on-one, talking about this because it tends to be a little bit more difficult for a lot of people to understand. And as far as government goes, when we talk about the budget, and taxing and spending, I always want somebody next to me that's an economics teacher or something to correct me whenever I get something wrong because, this is something that, the way we're going to deal with it is there's so much opinion that's involved in what you should spend, what you should save, what you should not spend on. And so how I approach it in AP Gov is we have to look at it as these are the facts, these are the numbers. So that's how I'm going to approach it. We'll get into, hopefully, what your opinion is of all of that. But this is one of those lectures that really lends itself well to, well, I disagree with that because, and this is my philosophy. So we're going to stick to the numbers. I'll show you what they are, in all of this. And then hopefully we can have that discussion and see what's going on. So some basic facts before we get into this that you have to be aware of. Things that I will be talking about throughout this entire subunit, right? One is revenue. Okay, revenue is money coming in. All right, so when money comes into the government in the form of taxes or whatever, that's called revenue. Money going out is called expenditures. That kind of has a double meaning though, which we'll get into here in just a second. So expenditures is money that they spend on things, spend on programs, whether it be Social Security, defense, education, wherever it is they're spending it on. And so what we're looking at here, and this is the 2020 federal budget, total revenues, money coming in was 3.42 trillion, money coming in. Money going out was 6.55 trillion. That difference, all right, if you expenditures minus revenue, that's what's going to give you your deficit for the year. And we'll talk more about why that number right there is astronomical. We've never seen a number like this in the history of the United States, so but we'll get to that. So revenues minus expenditures gives you your deficit, and when you add your deficit for the year, that's just what we spent more in 2020 than we brought in. So if you take that deficit and add it to the 2019 deficit, add it to the 2018 deficit, to the 2017 deficit, going all the way back to 1789 when we first started, if you add all of those deficits up, that equals the national debt. All right, so deficit versus debt. The total debt right now, as we're speaking, $27.8 trillion. That's how much money from 1789 to today that we have spent more than we have brought in. And so I'm going to introduce you guys to a website. If you're interested in this, we talk about conservative versus liberal. Conservatives typically are concerned about the debt. Liberals are concerned about spending, but then it kind of flips when they're in office, the hypocrisy that goes on in government. So that'll come up, I'm sure, in conversation. But a website that I'm going to introduce you to, if you're interested in the national debt or anything, money going out, money coming in, this is a website, usdebtclock.org. And for those of you that might have seen this, fascinating website. And all it is a running calculation of everything that is money in the United States, right? You have the national debt, all these things, so the red over here obviously is debt. You have revenue, which is in the green, so you got money coming in, you got money going out. Per population, how much does each person owe? How much bankruptcies. It has everything. So if you want to go check this out, it's just a running tally of the total dollar amount of all of this stuff. It's a fantastic website. And if we were in person, we'd go to this, but we don't have time in the video. But the thing to focus on is this upper left-hand corner, and that is the total national debt. And that is something that has everybody kind of concerned right now. You'll have people on different sides. One side says, well, it's not that big a deal. It's debt. It's always been there. It's always going to be there. It's not that big a deal. Others that say, we really need to pay this down. And we'll go through more of, the pros and cons of this, with me, being, somebody who really kind of wants to pay the debt down a little bit, it does concern me, but why is the question? Why does it concern me that it's this big? And it has to do with more than just this, I want to pay down debt. revolves around everything that we live in this worldwide economy. Who holds the debt? Who do we owe the debt to? What can we do to bring it down? What's the impact of other countries and their view of what our debt is and our ability to pay? So there's so much more than just your MSNBC and Fox News, talking heads talking about money in, money out. So much more in depth. And it's at this point that I would point out that's why I want somebody with an economics background sitting next to me so they can explain it a little better. But it's so involved. It's more than just what you hear. So please understand that as we go through this. Now, first thing that I want to talk about is money coming in, okay, revenue. And when we talk about revenue coming in to the U.S. government, we're talking about the IRS, right? The Internal Revenue Service, acronym, pay attention. And they're part of the Department of the Treasury. So they've got money coming in. And anytime you hear, the IRS, you think, probably something negative, because the IRS is what takes money out of your paycheck. They're taxing me to death. I wish my taxes were lower. So I don't know if anybody's ever said, you know what I like? One of my favorite things in the world, I really like the IRS. Said no one ever. So, when we look at this, that's kind of a negative. And of course, tax day coming up and all this stuff. So let's take a look at the money coming in and some of the numbers, right? We're going to stick with numbers. We're going to stick with facts. If you are talking about money coming in, the percent at which you are taxed depends on how much you make. We call that a progressive tax rate. So the more money you make, the higher the rate that you pay. Kind of. We'll kind of get into the kind of here in a second. But just basic, numbers. If you make, and we have to do the difference between capital gains and income tax. Ignore the yellow column for right now. Let's focus on the blue column. Blue column is income. So blue column is if you have a job, if you get a paycheck. That's what we're talking about with income. We're not talking about investments. We're not talking about buying and selling. We're talking about if you go to work, punch time clock, get a salary, whatever it is you do. That's the blue column. So if you make between $0 and $9,700 a year, you pay 10% of that to the government. That's the rate. If you make between $9,700 and almost not quite $40,000, you pay 12%. And you can see these columns. I don't have to speak, but you should pay attention to what's going on here because these numbers are going to matter here in a second. So if you make between roughly $40,000 and $84,000, your tax rate is 22%. Okay. If you make between $84,200 and $160,000, you pay 24%. And you can see on the top tax rate right now is 37%. We'll talk about the Trump tax cuts here in a second. But if you make more than $510,000 a year, you pay 37% on your income. Now, so you understand what's going on here with this income tax. These are the numbers on paper. But I'm going to be honest with you guys. Nobody pays these rates. Nobody, right? I mean, you think about, me, teacher, middle income, I am in this, I make between 40 and 84, right? So I'm above the 39. I make more than that as a teacher, but I don't make 84. So I'm in this 22% tax bracket. I don't pay quite 22. There's a reason for that. They're called tax expenditures, which we'll talk about. Deductions, loopholes, those types of things. So that's income. That's if you work for a living. If you use your money to make money, that's what we call capital gains. So here we're talking about, stocks, bonds, buying and selling of property, assets. So if you sell assets and make money, that is capital gains. They're taxed at a completely different rate. So if you make, let's say you have, a stock portfolio, you make dividends or you sell your stock and make a profit. If you make up to not quite $40,000 in that, in money coming in, you pay zero. You don't pay any tax on that whatsoever. So if you make over $40,000 or over $39,400, up to $434,000, you pay a 15% rate. So not quite $500,000, you pay 10%. If you make over $500,000, you pay 20%. So here's where we get into this whole, and by the way, this second side over here, that's a family. Okay, so if you and your spouse. The numbers are kind of comparable, but we're talking here. So here's where the disparity comes in, because if, for example, I make, middle income teacher, I am in the 22% range. Let's say the median income in the United States right now is, I think, 2020, it's around $68,000, okay? I don't quite make that much. So I'm just at the median income. I'm right in the middle, right? Let's just say I'm right in the middle. A little bit below, but that's okay. So if I'm right in the middle, what I pay on my income is 22%. Okay, so I make middle income, $68,000, we'll say, 22%. Somebody that makes $500,000, if they make all of their money in stocks and bonds, they pay 20%. So you can understand why these people right here might be upset with this system, right? Because of the difference in percent. So, but who are these people? And this is, again, why I wish you guys were here in person, because I want these questions, because everybody always has a question. Here's the numbers, but here's your opinion. These people, right, they're going to make arguments to say the reason jobs are out there is because of what we invest and the risks that we take. These people are going to argue we're the labor, we make you guys possible. So those differences and those opinions have been around forever. I mean, we're not going to solve them in this class, but I do love to have those conversations. So who are we talking about here? Well, if you're talking about capital gains, here's what we deal with. The top 1% of earners in this country, the wealthy, the top 1% of wealth in this country owns 38% of the stocks. Okay? If you add the next 9%, so the top 10% of wealthy people, they own 84% of the stock. So the top 10% of wealthy people in this country own 84% of the stock. The bottom 50%, so these people, middle income and below, own 1% total of the stock. So, and most of that are people that are fortunate enough to have an IRA through their job or a 401k or something like that. But the vast majority is owned by the wealthy. And so, this argument between, you got the Bernie Bros versus, whoever you want on the right to be your champion for, lower tax cuts, Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, whatever. They get into these discussions as these people. So if I'm, a gazillionaire, and let's put me and, I don't know, let's say, name anybody that makes money off of their wealth. Let's say, I don't know, Elon Musk or, CEOs of any company who don't make an income, but they get paid in stock dividends. So if you look at these people, they make millions of dollars a year, they pay 20, I pay 22. There's the argument. That goes back to then this, what is fair, what is not. And you're never going to get both sides to agree on this because the risk, right? We have to weigh that in. So, all these things come into play. But these are the numbers, and hopefully in class we'll get to have these discussions. So other things that we talk about with money coming in, there are other ways that the government brings in money. Every time, if you have a job, a lot of you guys have part-time jobs. If you get a paycheck, you pay Social Security tax. Well, Social Security, they tax 6.2% of the money that you earned on the first $137,700. And after that, you don't pay anything over that amount. So if, let's say, and this is the example that I give, like we're going to stick with median income. Let's pretend I'm median income and pretend I make $68,000 a year. So I pay on all of my salary 6.2% into Social Security. Now, Social Security is that retirement program. When you turn 65, you're eligible for Social Security. You get paid. You get paid from the government. That's money that you've been putting into the system. But if you make so I pay 6.2% on 100% of my income. People always say, these things, these programs that are out of control. How do you control the cost of Social Security and Medicare? It's out of control. Easy answer, right? You look at the math, look at the numbers. People that make over $137,000 a year don't pay 6.2% on all of their income. They only pay it on the first $137,000. You want to fix Social Security? Easy fix. This would never pass Congress. This is never brought up in Congress. But let's say you remove that and everybody pays 6.2% on 100% of their salary. That would fix Social Security like that. It's not going to happen, right? You think about it, and we can do the math and statistics and all of that. But people that make more than that don't pay that on 100% of their income. If they did, it would solve the problem. Never going to happen. Another way, the Medicare tax. And this has no limit, right? You pay 1.5% of your income into Medicare. Now, Medicare is basically health insurance for old people, health insurance for people over the age of 65. So it doesn't matter how much you make, you pay 1.45% of your income into Medicare. Think about that. If that were no limit, how much money could we generate? Look at that. Look at these numbers. 6.2, 1.45. How much money is this? 1/3 of all federal revenue coming in, money coming in, comes from this tax right here. You eliminate that, how much more money would the government bring in? It's math. Again, you can make arguments that it's a great idea, arguments it's a stupid idea. People that don't have money aren't going to spend it. They're not going to take the risk. I get all those arguments, but these are the numbers, and you're going to start to see why people have the discussions, why there's a difference between, the Bernie Bros and the Wall Street guys. And this is it. So bonds are another thing. And the government sells bonds. I don't know if you guys ever got, probably not as much anymore, but back in the day, for Christmas, grandma might buy you a $50, savings bond. Well, when you're a kid and grandma buys you a $50 savings bond, you're like, really, grandma? A savings bond? I can't play with this. This is not doing me any good. But that $50 savings bond that grandma bought you, if you hang on to it for 7 to 10 years, that $50 savings bond becomes $100. So you can sell it after a certain number of time and make money back. So what they do is they do this. They're basically borrowing money from you to fund things. So they sell you a $50 savings bond. They get your $50. The government does. They can use that to buy something. Later on, though, they're going to have to pay that back. So they pay you back with interest, and that's kind of how that works. And they also sell these to foreign governments. We'll get into that. That's another whole other conversation. Who owns the most money? Bonds, U.S. bonds? China. Yeah, they own more of our money than any other country, any other person. So, whole other conversation. And of course, we borrow money. And that deficit, when we talk about the deficit spending, that's what we're talking about, is that borrowing from ourselves. Now, what does that mean? That means, what we're going to do? It's like the country has a great big giant credit card, and they're going to use their credit card and swipe it to buy a new, F-16, fighter jet, or a new B-1 bomber, or they're going to buy, a high-speed rail from San Francisco to New York. Swipe the credit card. That's borrowing money, okay? But that's going to have to be paid back. Borrowing is what really, I think, is kind of putting us in this deficit mode. Revenue minus, expenditures equals deficit. So I'm going to show you a graph right here, and I again, economics person sitting next to me would be much better at this than I would. But if you're looking at deficits per year, and this just goes back out of 1960, you can see the total amount of money that we spent more than we took in. And you can go all the way back. It was not a whole lot of money. Now, obviously, in the 1930s, with the Great Depression, 1940s with World War II, we spent a lot of money. World War I, go back even further. Huge amount of money borrowed, but we ended up paying that back because of revenue that we brought in after that. And then it kind of evened out again after World War II. Revenue started coming in again. We quit spending as much on the war effort. So we kind of go back to zero. And then enter the 1980s. Here's where it kind of explodes. Reaganomics, Reagan comes in, says, tax cuts are the way to go. And if you lower taxes, this is the supply side, if you lower taxes for businesses and for the wealthy, that money will trickle down into the economy. And if people all have jobs, they pay income tax, which will increase revenue. So by giving tax cuts, you will increase revenue. Okay, we know the numbers, guys. It didn't work, all right? It's never worked. Tax cuts have never, in the United States history, have never paid for themselves. That's a fact. Arguments on that side is, well, but, those are the people that do the investments. Without investments, companies don't get built. Those are the arguments that we'll have left and right. We're talking about numbers right now. It's never worked. So, but it does explode in the 1980s, where we get this huge, deficit spending, and most of this was defense. I mean, obviously, you fight in the Cold War. You've got the Soviets, nuclear weapons, all this. George H.W. Bush, one of the reasons that George H.W. Bush was a one-term president is right here. He couldn't get this under control, and he promised to. And that was one of the things, regardless of the character of the man, which and you guys know I've said this in class before, I have a lot of respect for George H.W. Bush. I think he was probably one of the, most noble, patriots that we've ever had. But he could not get a hold of the economy. And then Clinton comes in. And this is interesting because people will give, good sides, bad sides to both of these things. Clinton comes in, and you'll notice what happened was he actually reduced the deficit and actually had a surplus. So Democrats, in their infinite wisdom, they're saying, well, Clinton was awesome because he was able to take the deficit and turn it into a surplus. Guys, understand all of this. It always depends. It doesn't depend on who these people are, right? It depends on what else is going on. I've said this in class before. The deficit spending under Reagan, building up the military, fighting the Soviets, that's what was going on. Under Clinton, this was the dot-com boom, all right? This is when you first saw, personal computers and the internet, beginning and trade, and revenues came in like crazy. So it wasn't Bill Clinton's policies that allowed him to get to a surplus. It was what was going on in the economy. So we blame Reagan for running deficits. We give Clinton credit for running a surplus. Neither one of those necessarily is deserved, okay? It's what else is going on. But we did have a surplus. Last time we had a surplus was 2000. And then George W. Bush comes in. What do you suppose happened here that caused George W. Bush to go from this surplus to a deficit? 2001, guys, 9/11. So again, things outside of the control of the president. 9/11 happens, again, increased spending, the war on terror, all these things going into Iraq, going into Afghanistan, led to these deficits. Now, right here, here's where we get into this black line here, the record that was set. This is coming out of what they refer to as the Great Recession, okay? George W. Bush coming into Obama, you had the bank crisis, you had that meltdown. I'm not sure if you guys covered that in your American history class, but it was a mess. And it was, this was bailout money. You had to bail out the banks. You had to bail out the automotive industry. You had to bail out all of these things. And that led to a $1.55 trillion deficit. Broke every single record. Of total dollar amount, now not percent, but total dollar amount of deficit spending. Then after we got through that financial crisis, you can see the numbers here. We start to get back into lowering the deficit. We're still running a debt because we're still below the zero line, but the deficits start to shrink. And then 2015, 2016, we start to run deficit. Now the reason I show you this graph is because I don't have enough room on this graph to show you the next one, because of what happened because of the pandemic, okay? Not enough room on this graph. So, and I'm bad at Excel. Flip it upside down. We're gonna look at the top instead of the bottom. This is what happens afterwards. So this right here was that black line. This was the record, $1.55 trillion deficit. It's been almost tripled now. 2020, 2021, we're going to shatter every record we've ever seen, both dollar amount and percent of going into debt because of what happened with this financial crisis that COVID. Now again, we can get into the political arguments of this of should Trump done more, could we have done this, the thing goes back to money coming in, money coming out, and we've talked about this in class. This was not just spending on COVID. In fact, very little of this was spending on COVID. Most of this deficit was the Trump tax cuts. So you have less money coming in, right? That's gonna increase your debt. So, and I've said this before, when should you lower taxes? When should you raise taxes? When should you increase spending? When should you cut spending? It depends. And I've always said that, and hopefully you guys get that. It depends on what else is going on in the economy. So most economists would say tax cuts during this is what led to this deficit. So, I mean, that's not me, that's economists. So, again, wish my little economist friend was in here. Let's put Bickers in class. We need to remind me when you guys are watching this video, go get Bickers and bring him in. He's the economic genius. So, these are interesting numbers. That was the record before. This is a record now. 2021 may break that record. We don't know. We don't know what's going on. So, that's, deficit, revenues coming in. And so if you look at who increased the debt the most, obviously, dollar amount, it was Obama. Now it's going to be Trump. If you look at percentage, a little bit different way to look at it. If you look at the percent increase from the time they began to the time they end, Clinton in 7th place, and this is since 1972. 32%, Carter at 43%. Gerald R. Ford increased the debt total 47%. H.W. Bush, 54%. Then in third is Obama, raised it 74%. George W. Bush raised it 101%, so doubled from the time he came in. But the champion and reigning champion and still king of debt is Ronald Reagan. He increased the debt 186%. So, you're looking at these numbers. If you look at total dollar amounts, now you'll notice there's somebody missing from my numbers here, and that is Trump. And that is because we don't know yet, because his budget that he wrote last year is fiscal year 2021. We're not through that yet, right? And that's something you have to understand about presidents. Their last year in office is not where it stops, because their budget in their last year is the next year's president's first budget. So Obama's last budget, Trump had to deal with his first year. Trump's last budget, Biden's going to have to deal with his first year. So we don't know where, until it's all said and done after 2021, where Trump is going to fit into this. He'll make it. He'll make it on this list. Somewhere probably between, 5th and 3rd maybe. But without a doubt, Reagan, we can say Reagan was the king of debt. But this is percent. If you look at dollar amount, Trump's going to win that. Guess who's in second place? Obama. Obama broke all records until this COVID stuff. So these numbers are going to change. And that's something about economics that you need to understand. Are you talking about percent, dollar amount? Those things matter. So hopefully you'll bring questions up. So to take a step back, we're not talking about the budget policy yet. How is the budget made? But I have to introduce where this money goes. So this is money coming in, money going out, borrowing. What do we spend our money on? This is an introductory graph that I want you guys to try to wrap your head around. Social Security, which is that the money that you make after you retire because you've been paying in your whole life, you pay that percent in from your paycheck. 24%, almost a quarter of our total federal budget goes to pay Social Security. The next biggest is Medicare. This is health insurance for old people over the age of 65. I say old. I'm going to be there soon. 14%. Then you have Medicaid. Now Medicaid, 9% of it is Medicaid, and this is basically health insurance for the poor and disabled. So if you have a disability that you can't work, you get Medicaid. You can go to the doctor and get it paid for. Income security, unemployment, stuff like that. And then interest on the debt. You have to pay interest on the money that we borrowed. All right, this is what we call mandatory spending. This piece of the pie right here has to, by law, be paid. People have paid into this. That's their money. They get it back. People have paid into this. They get it back. These are all things that, by law, the government has to pay. They can't mess with those. They can't say, they could, but it'd be political suicide. They can't say, what we're going to do? We realize that you guys paid into Social Security and, cost of living adjustments. You're used to getting, you're 80 years old and you're used to getting your, $2,500 check a month. I'll tell you what we're going to do. Because we're in such a budget hole, looking at you, we're going to cut your payment down. We're only going to give you $1,000 a month. Good luck living on it, right? Nobody's going to do that. That's why they have to pay this. That's why it's mandatory spending. You can't really cut it. It would be devastating. So these are things that must be spent. So this piece of the pie, 31%, is what we call discretionary, which means these are things you can cut. You really can't cut Social Security. You really can't cut Medicare. People paid into this. That's their money. You owe them. This is the stuff we can cut. So let's take this little piece of the pie right here, this 31% that you can kind of mess with. We're not going to pay you as much. We're going to pay you a little more. Budget cuts, tightening the belt, all those things. And let's take a look at this wedge right here. If you expand that out, this is the 2020 discretionary budget. Defense, 57% of that little wedge, 57% of it goes to defense. The next biggest thing is Veterans Affairs, and then Health and Human Services, obviously all the things that go into that. Education, yay, $62 billion out of a total budget, $4.5 trillion in 2020. Education gets $62 billion. Do that math. So all of this is that little wedge, soapbox. And so a lot of people are looking at, this defense. Obviously, this is the biggest chunk. And so the argument can be made, or the political argument is, should we be spending that much on defense? The numbers are, we spend that much on defense. Should we or shouldn't we? That's the political argument that hopefully we can have in class. So that's discretionary. We're going to get more into these numbers as we get into the whole budget process that Congress and the president argue about all the time. But you know, there's something that we don't always talk about, and this is tax expenditures. Tax expenditures are those things like when you file your taxes. There are certain deductions you can take. Like, for example, I get to deduct the insurance on my mortgage. I get to deduct a whopping $250 of my own money for school supplies because I'm a teacher. And big time. I'm rolling in the dough. But these are things, these deductions, these loopholes that you can deduct from your income so that you don't have to pay taxes on it. So what are these things? Obviously, if you give money to charity, you can deduct that from your income. Mortgage interest, like I said, the interest I pay on my mortgage for my house. You know, if you own a business, business equipment. There we go. Technology issues. If you own a business, you can deduct the depreciation on your equipment. And obviously, you know, I'm going to say this, you know, these tax expenditures, these loopholes, these deductions that you can take overwhelmingly benefit. The more money you make, the more loopholes there are. And that is not a political statement. That is the number. So we're going to take a look at these numbers. If you're looking at the tax code and how the stuff that you can deduct, all right, so the deductions, the top fifth, all right, of all of the money that you can deduct from your taxes, 58.8% of that money goes to the top fifth. If you break that to the top 1%, they get 24.1% of it. So the top 1% gets a fourth of all of those deductions you can deduct from your taxes. The bottom fifth, they get a whopping 4.3. So these are the numbers. Again, I'm setting it up, and you guys know what I'm setting up here. I'm setting up this discussion that we're going to have in class of, is this okay? Are you here or are you here? That's going to matter probably what your argument is. Are you, a person that supports, a tax system that, wants to, give more to the bottom? Or are you, part of the program that says, these are the people that do the investments. Without these people, business wouldn't exist. We can have that discussion. These are the numbers. So don't shoot the messenger. Don't shoot me emails about these numbers because I'm not making a decision. And you can tell kind of my trepidation with this because the budget and money that's spent is probably the one thing outside of the Second Amendment and legalization of marijuana that people just argue about the most when we have class, high school kids. So we'll get into that discussion. These are just the numbers. So what are some of these deductions? Obviously, if you're an employer and, there are laws in place where you can avoid paying into your employees' health insurance, health care, you can deduct that. Mortgage interest on if you have a home business, if you work out of your house. These are the big ones here. If you have an IRA or a 401k retirement account, you can deduct that. And here's the thing, and I'm gonna complain one more time. You know me, I'm going to complain more than that. But school districts do not have this. We have what's called KPERS, Kansas Public Employees Retirement Account. But we don't have a 401k. So the biggest thing is if your business, if your company contributes to your retirement, they get to deduct that from their taxes. So that's another one of those things that this is money that normally would be coming into the government, but it's not because of the loophole. And we go on down, rentals, if you have rentals, giving to charity, if you own foreign corporations, getting money from them, you can deduct that. The child credit one, this is probably the one here at the bottom, only $18 billion that most families can take advantage of. So you get a child credit tax break if you have kids. But that's also, if that weren't there, that's money that would come into the government. So those are those are some examples of money the government does not collect because it's written into law. So what is the total amount? And we'll go back to 2019 because that's the last numbers that I have. If you look at that piece of the pie that was discretionary spending, $1.3 trillion, and then you look at the tax breaks that people get, $1.42 trillion, that entire wedge of the pie would be paid for if those deductions were not there. Now, there's a downside to those deductions not being there, and we'll talk about that as we get into the policy. But here's kind of a different way to look at it. If you take that 1.4 trillion in tax breaks, that loopholes or whatever they get, called tax expenditures, 1.4 trillion would pay for if those didn't exist, if you didn't take mortgage interest deduction, if you didn't take child tax credit, if you didn't take rental income deduction, if none of those existed, it would pay for Social Security. Zeroed out. It would pay for Medicare. Zeroed out. Right? And so, when you're looking at this, again, to get into the argument, these are the numbers. But again, if you look at in 2018, we'll talk about why these numbers are different. $779 billion was the total deficit in 2018. I had to go back to 2018 to find a number under $1 trillion. So the total deficit, we would have been, had not those been there, we would have been in the black in 2018. So again, goods and bads. So these are tax expenditures that the more money you make, the more loopholes there are for you. Those are just the numbers. Now, what about tax reduction? Tax expenditures, loopholes. Tax reduction, that's when they lower the rate that you pay. Now, obviously, everybody wants a tax cut. Everybody. I want a tax cut. Low income want a tax cut. High income want a tax cut. Nobody likes to pay taxes, even though we do realize they're necessary. But I will also say again, they do benefit the wealthy. And so when they reduce the taxable amount. And you remember the chart that I showed you, 37% if you make over $500,000, but 10% if you make $10,000. If you look at the Trump tax cuts, this is when he came in 2017. This is one of his first executive orders, by the way. He put out there this tax cut, and they used reconciliation, which we'll talk about with Biden when, this whole thing with the budget that Biden's passing with reconciliation. This is what the Republicans did to give this tax cut, and the thing that gets me is how it was proposed. You guys know how much I hate hypocrisy. 2017, you guys were not paying attention to anything government, but hopefully you are now. But they kept talking about this middle class tax cut. This is a tax cut for the middle class. No, it was not a tax cut for the middle class. Who did it benefit? If you made over $1 million, 14.3% of the tax cut went to you. Between $500,000 and $1 million, 10.6%. The people here, below 10, 10 to 20, if you're thinking about, me and this middle income, I got a 1.5% tax break with those tax cuts. So if you're looking at the percent, now, dollar amounts notwithstanding, and again, we can argue percent, we can argue dollar amount, but you cannot call this a middle class tax cut. I'm not saying it was bad, or I'm not saying it was good. I'm just saying this did not benefit the middle class. It benefited the wealthy. So that's the conversation that we can have. If you look at capital gains, because they also lowered the capital gains tax, that's on stocks, on investments, on property sold, assets, your money making money, not you getting a paycheck. Over 3/4 of it went to the richest 1%. So when they lowered that capital gains tax, the poorest 20%, 0. Second, 0.2. Me, 0.8. Because I don't own any stocks. I'm a teacher. So you can see how this kind of works out. But if the economy's booming, regardless of, they're getting a lot more money. But what about these guys? Are their wages going up? Are they making more money? Is the economy good? So you can make arguments on both sides of this. The problem that we see, though, with real wages, when you take into account inflation, and we're going to go back to the last recession that we had, and this was, after the initial bailout in 2008, 2009, the tail end of George W. Bush, we saw wages go up. Okay, that was a stimulus. That was stimulus money. Then they went down. And they went down, they held kind of steady. They started going up roughly, 2011, 2012. We see a steady rise until we get to about 2016, and then they start going down again. We see a blip in 2018, but then after that blip, then real wages start going down. And again, what these lines represent are those people that get a paycheck, that have a job, that work for a living. There's not investors. This is not stocks. This is not wealth. This is wages. These are people that go to work. And so you can see, if your baseline over here, 2008, being 0, we're above the line, but we're not that far above the line. So it depends on how you're looking at it. And I've always told you guys this. And why I always tell you that the stock market is not a good indicator of the economy. And I wish Nightly News would quit telling me every day, well, the stocks were down, blah, 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 or stocks were up. It's not a good indicator, guys, because 1% of the wager or the wealth in this country, the top 1% wealthy people own an overwhelmingly amount of that. So it's a bad indicator. This is a little better. How are we doing? We're doing a little bit better now than we were in, after the last recession, but we're not doing as good as we were, after that last stimulus. What's going to happen with this stimulus? What's going to happen to wages? So we have to pay attention to this. And we go back Keynesian, we go back, supply side, what's it going to be? And I always say it depends on what else is going on in the economy. The Lecon friend over here needs to be here. So we'll talk more about this as we get into this. So to sum up, basically, guys, we have a huge government and we have huge budgets. I mean, the things that our government pays for, from Social Security to Medicare to defense to transportation, we have a huge government, and that means we have big government or big budgets. We also have the rise of the national security state, guys. You make the argument whether we can spend more or less on the military. We have to. I mean, there's no no way we can go without trying to protect ourselves. Now, I've said this in class. This is going to look different than it did. I don't know if we're going to need as many nuclear weapons as we do maybe some science geeks that can kind of catch the computer stuff that Russia and China are trying to do to us. So the national security state is going to look a little different. I'm more worried about them crashing our economy than I am about them dropping a bomb. So that's gonna change. Rise of social service state, obviously, as people retire, Social Security, Medicare. Just the sheer cost of health insurance. You look at and the pandemic, I think, with COVID-19 has pointed this out. We're not ready for it. We were not ready for this pandemic. What can we do? I certainly don't know. But obviously, we do look to our government to do something to get the ball rolling on this. We'll see what happens when it comes up. And this is probably one of the dirtiest words in government, as far as if you're a social or if you're an economic conservative. This is of incrementalism, and I think I mentioned this in class before. Everybody's budget, transportation, military, housing and urban development, the states, the city, everybody asks for a little bit more money every year. I need a little bit more than I did last year. And that's what we call incrementalism. They're always asking for more, and that drives up the budget, drives up the debt, and I don't have an answer to it. So basically, these things that we look at that are these uncontrollable expenditures, how do we cover these? When we go to war, I don't know if anybody says, hey, we were just attacked on 9/11 by Al-Qaeda. Let's spend less on the military. Nobody said that. We have, all of these, these elderly people that need COVID shots. Well, let's not spend as much money on Social Security because those old people, nobody says that. And so there is no easy answer, okay? We'll have the left and right argument. Now that you guys know the numbers, when we get into the budget, you'll be able to, I've got an activity that we're going to do where you get to actually control what is spent and what is not. And I will tell you right now, I've had 0 students pass this test of balancing the budget because it's just impossible. So I don't have the answer. My invisible economic friend over here, I'm sure, doesn't have the answer. But we will, next time that we talk, we are going to look at the budget itself, the players, who's asking for what, who does what, who gets what, and you guys will get an opportunity to try your hand at it, okay? So hopefully you understood this, and you got at least a little bit of information that you contributed in class. And so when we are together face to face, I really, really, really want you guys to give me your input on this. So start thinking about it and tell me what you think. There are no right or wrong answers. This is why we call it politics, and hopefully this is a good start for you, okay? This is a fun video to make. I still wish we were in person, but I enjoy this stuff. So until next time, guys, hang in there. We'll get through it all. Thanks.